A hip external rotation kinetic stretch can be really helpful in building a lot of active mobility. It's great to use as a warm-up for a squat day. It can also be really good just to augment your hip rotation work to build a healthier hip capsule and really augment your hip stretches and learning your end range control, essentially. So this is gonna be an elevated position, which is great for people who struggle on the floor in that 90-90 position because you actually do have really limited hip mobility. 90-90 is a hard position to get into. So for this, we are going to elevate using an incline bench. If you have a really limited hip mobility, you might need to incline it even more. Lower incline is going to be a little bit more into end range, so it'll be a little bit more progressed. Now for this movement, we want to make sure we are kind of putting our weight onto this front leg in a little bit of a hip hinge position. So I am not just leaning forward through my spine, I'm gonna stay tall, and then from there, lean forward at my hips. So as I'm leaning forward, I'm kind of sticking my butt out a little bit, reaching my glute for the back wall behind me. That's gonna be your start position. And then from here, we're gonna actively think about pulling our leg into our chest, but it is glued to the bench. So instead of pulling my leg to my chest, it's actually gonna pull my chest down. Now again, most people will think, I'm just gonna pull my chest down, right? I want your chest to stay tall, your spine to stay long, and I actually want you to think about leading with your belly button and pelvis, and your chest kind of comes forward at a 45-degree angle. As you do this, you should feel a nice deep glute stretch in that leg that is on the bench. And then from here, we are going to actively press our leg down in the opposite motion to push ourselves back up. So we're using the front hip stuff to pull ourselves into this nice deep stretch. Then we are pushing our leg into the bench to push ourselves back up. That is gonna be the kinetic stretch. Depending on how much mobility you have, you might not go as far as me, which is totally fine. Please don't start to use your spine. It's not gonna provide you any additional benefit. And if we're trying to train your hip, we wanna train your hip, not your spine. We wanna separate those two. Now, if you don't have a lot of mobility, over 3 to 5 seconds, I want you to take the entire time to get to your end range of motion. So you might go slower than I'm going because I have more mobility. That's totally fine. Take the entire time to get to your end range, see that end range of motion, say hello to it, then say goodbye, come out of it, unless your program calls for a pause. As we're doing this, it is really intentional and we should really feel that we're getting a nice deep stretch in the glute. We are not getting any sharp pinching pain in the groin. If you are, that is closing angle sensation. You need a different setup or some sort of different exercise. Now, as we're doing this, the other thing to pay attention to is your belt buckle. A lot of people will come here and they'll kind of be angled away. To really get the most out of this, I want you to think about your belt buckle turned towards the front leg and your knee at 90 degrees. Then we can get a nice deep glute stretch here rather than coming out of it here. You'll get a little bit more out of it if you turn your chest towards the leg that is working. So, as you're doing this, you should feel that you can get a little bit deeper, that you can contract those muscles a little bit more intensely, and you might be able to slowly lower the incline to get into more and more hip rotation. The ways that we eventually will progress this is adding some sort of weighted ball or weight to this movement as well, and eventually we can progress it into another exercise, but that's something you'll want to look into after being really consistent with this. So, be patient. These gains and this progress takes a long time, but over time you should note some of those signs of progress. So pay attention to them and be consistent, and you should feel that your hips slowly start to feel a lot more like butter.